How Mad Jack walked out of a burning town with nothing but a sword. September 9th, 1943, Vietri-sur-Mare, Italy. 3:30 in the morning, the landing craft hit the beach and the ramp dropped, and Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill was the first man off, moving fast, a cloud of dust behind him, sword on his belt, revolver in his hand, bagpipes somewhere on his person, as always. The beach at Vietri was quiet, no welcoming party, no machine gun fire, no artillery, just sand and darkness and the sound of boots hitting the ground. The soldiers behind Churchill exchanged glances. This was too easy. It was. Within hours, the easy landing became one of the most vicious fights the British commandos would face in the entire war. 5 days of combat, street fighting, house by house, German mortar fire raining down from the hills, machine guns in windows, snipers on rooftops, and in the middle of all of it, walking through burning streets with a Scottish broadsword in his hand, Jack Churchill. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories about the men who walked into places nobody should have survived and walked out carrying a sword. To understand what happened at Salerno, you need to understand the plan. And then you need to understand how completely the plan fell apart. Operation Avalanche. The Allied invasion of mainland Italy. September 9th, 1943. The idea was straightforward. Land on the beaches of the Gulf of Salerno, establish a beachhead, push inland, link up with the British 8th Army advancing from the south, and capture Naples. The commando's role was specific. Number 2 Commando and Number 41 Royal Marine Commando would land at Vietri-sul-Mare on the western edge of the Gulf. Their job was to secure the passes through the mountains that overlooked the bay. If the Germans held those passes, they could pour artillery fire down onto the beachhead and destroy the invasion. Churchill led Number 2 Commando ashore in the darkness. The landing was unopposed. The beach was clear. Churchill moved fast, leading his men inland. Within the first hour, he'd captured a battery of German field guns positioned on the hills above the beach. Guns that could have fired on the invasion fleet. Guns that were now silent because a man with a sword had arrived before anyone expected. That was the easy part. By daylight, the Germans had reacted. The Wehrmacht was not an army that sat still when attacked. They counterattacked immediately, fiercely, and with a precision that stunned the Allies. Panzer divisions that were supposed to be further north appeared in the hills above Salerno. Artillery batteries opened up. Infantry moved into the towns and villages along the coast. Vietri became a battleground. The town was small, stone buildings, narrow streets, a church, shops, houses with thick walls that could stop bullets but not artillery shells. The kind of Italian coastal town that in peacetime would be photographed by tourists. In September 1943, it was being torn apart. German mortar crews set up in the hills above the town. The distinctive whistle and crump of mortar rounds became the soundtrack of every hour. Shells landing in streets, shattering walls, blowing holes in roofs, starting fires that nobody could put out because fighting fires required standing still, and standing still meant dying. MG-42 machine guns appeared in upper-story windows, the weapon that American soldiers called Hitler's buzzsaw. 1,200 rounds per minute, a rate of fire so fast that individual shots blended into a continuous ripping sound. Any street covered by an MG-42 was a street you didn't walk down unless you wanted to die. German snipers took positions in bell towers and on rooftops. Patient, disciplined marksmen who waited for an officer, a radio man, a medic, anyone whose death would cause maximum disruption, and fired a single shot. This was the environment Churchill operated in for 5 days. 5 days. Most commando raids lasted hours. The longest operations were measured in days, after which the commandos withdrew to their ships. But at Salerno, There were no ships coming. The commandos were fighting as line infantry, holding positions, defending ground, enduring the kind of sustained, grinding combat that they hadn't been trained for and weren't equipped for. They held a critical road and rail junction at Vitry. If the junction fell, the western end of the beachhead would collapse. The Germans knew this. They attacked the junction repeatedly. Infantry assaults supported by armor. A Tiger tank appeared on the road. Enormous, terrifying. Its 88mm gun capable of destroying anything the commandos had. The commandos stopped it with a Piat, a spring-loaded anti-tank weapon that looked like something from a plumber's workshop. Unreliable, inaccurate, effective only at suicidally close range. A commando crew fired multiple rounds into the Tiger at point-blank range until it stopped moving. Churchill was everywhere during those 5 days. Not in a command post, not behind a wall studying a map, in the streets, moving between positions, checking on his men, redistributing ammunition, carrying wounded to aid stations, doing the work of a sergeant and a colonel simultaneously, because that's what the situation required. His sword was on his belt throughout. He drew it when the fighting got close. When German soldiers broke through a position and the combat became room to room, wall to wall, the kind of fighting where a grenade and a blade were more useful than a rifle. One incident stands out, not because it was the most dramatic, though it was, because it captures the essence of what made Jack Churchill different from every other officer in the British Army. A section of the town was on fire. Mortar rounds had hit a row of buildings and the fires had spread. Thick black smoke pouring through the narrow streets, visibility down to feet, the heat intense enough to blister paint off walls and melt the tar on the road. A squad of commandos was trapped, cut off by the fire on one side and German positions on the other. They couldn't advance through the flames. They couldn't retreat through the Germans. They were stuck in a shrinking pocket of survivable air between two kinds of death. Churchill went in. Through the smoke, through the fire, through streets where the air itself was hot enough to burn the inside of your throat, his uniform smoking, his hair singed, his eyes streaming from the smoke, but moving, always moving. The steady, unhurried walk of a man who had decided that fire was an obstacle, not a boundary. He found the trapped squad, 4 men, 2 wounded, pinned behind a stone wall that was the only thing between them and a German machine gun on one side and a burning building on the other. Churchill assessed the situation in seconds, the same way he'd assessed the vineyard terraces at Piagoletti, the same way he'd assessed the beach at Malloy. Find the problem, find the solution, move. He organized the 2 unwounded men to carry their wounded comrades. Then he led them back through the burning streets, not running, walking, because running through fire meant breathing hard, and breathing hard meant inhaling smoke, and inhaling smoke meant dying. He walked them out, through the fire, through the smoke, past buildings that were collapsing around them, past walls that cracked and fell as the heat destroyed the mortar between the stones. Chunks of masonry hitting the ground where they'd been standing seconds earlier. They made it to the commando perimeter. The squad was safe. The wounded were evacuated. Churchill's uniform was burned through in 3 places. His eyebrows were gone. His face was red and raw from the heat. He didn't mention it. Didn't sit down. Didn't go to the aid station. He walked to the next position and asked his sergeant what ammunition they had left. This was the pattern of those 5 days. Crisis after crisis. Churchill moving from one to the next. The sword on his belt. The revolver in his hand. The absolute refusal to sit still while his men were in danger. On the 4th day, American armored vehicles finally reached Vitry. Sherman tanks grinding up the road from the beachhead. The cavalry arriving. The pressure on the commandos eased. The road junction held. On the fifth day, Churchill organized the night attack on Piegolotti that resulted in 42 prisoners. 6 columns, charging through vineyard terraces in the dark, shouting "Commando" at the top of their lungs. Churchill, with his corporal and his sword, collecting prisoners one by one. The total haul at Salerno was staggering for a commando unit. 136 prisoners between numbers 2 and 41 commando. More than the U.S. 46th Division had taken in the same period. Multiple German positions destroyed, a critical junction held, a beachhead saved. Churchill was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, his first DSO. The citation described his leadership during 5 days of sustained combat, his personal courage under fire, and his role in capturing the German positions above the beachhead. A bar to the DSO followed for the night attack at Piegolotti. 2 DSOs, the second highest gallantry decoration in the British military, awarded twice, for actions that included walking through a burning town with a sword, stopping a Tiger tank with a plumber's weapon, and capturing 42 prisoners in the dark. After Salerno, a war correspondent asked Churchill about the fighting. About the 5 days. About the fire. About the sword. Churchill's answer was characteristically brief. War is uncomfortable. Italy was warm. The fires made it warmer. Beyond that, there's nothing to discuss. Nothing to discuss. 5 days of combat distilled into 2 sentences and a shrug. The correspondent pressed. Wasn't he afraid? Walking through burning streets? Leading men through fire? Churchill looked at him with the expression that every journalist who ever interviewed him would come to know. The polite, patient, slightly puzzled look of a man who genuinely could not understand why anyone would consider fear relevant to the conversation. An officer's job is to be where his men are. If his men are in a burning town, the officer is in a burning town. It's not complicated. Not complicated. The motto of a man who had fought the entire Second World War with weapons from the 14th century and never once considered that this might be unusual. The commandos who fought at Salerno never forgot those 5 days. For most of them, it was the longest sustained combat they experienced in the war. Longer than Norway, longer than anything that followed. The intensity of the street fighting, the close quarters, the fires, the German counterattacks marked them. What they remembered most was Churchill. Not the sword, though they remembered that. Not the bagpipes, though they remembered those too. What they remembered was the walking, the steady, unhurried, absolutely purposeful movement of a man who walked through fire and smoke and gunfire as if he were walking through a park. One veteran tried to explain it. You'd think, watching him, that the war was an inconvenience, not a danger, an inconvenience, like rain at a picnic, something to be acknowledged and then ignored. He'd walk down a street with mortar rounds dropping and machine guns firing, and he wouldn't run, wouldn't duck, wouldn't flinch. He'd just walk. And somehow, nothing hit him. As if the bullets and the shells could sense that this man was not subject to their jurisdiction. Not subject to their jurisdiction. The perfect description of Jack Churchill. A man who operated outside the normal rules of warfare, of physics, of self-preservation, and somehow, impossibly, survived every time. If you were trapped in a burning building with Germans on one side and fire on the other, and you saw a man with a sword walking toward you through the smoke, would you follow him out? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the men who walked through fire, make sure to subscribe.